start with, does every manager understand their importance? Keeping it simple. The tone that you take is the tone that will be received. And the way people talk about our company has a lot to do with the way they experience you as their manager.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutvik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I sat down with Liferay's Chief People Officer, Matt Poladian. Matt oversees global human resources for Liferay and is responsible for building strategies for talent management, recruiting, branding, compensation, and employee development. Matt's insight on remote leadership and the importance of this in creating a vibe is something to pay attention to. All right, Matt, we're here. Matt is a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, and an HR leader, and I'm just so excited to hear about his stories of vibes.
Yeah.
Right? Culture.
Let's talk about the vibe.
So tell us a little bit about yourself so we get, a general idea of kind of where you come from and what you're up to.
So what's interesting is I am an HR leader now, but I started in the business. I was a marketing account executive. And so I didn't really even know what HR was, but I quickly, when I started my job at a marketing agency, I realized there was a lot that goes into creating the environment I was working in. And at that time, the agency I worked with didn't have anyone sponsoring that. And so I kind of took it on myself. And that's what was my first I think my first foray into the HR world. I ended up taking HR positions after business school. But I think I always had this kind of idea that in order for us to do our best work, we have to do it in an environment that enables that.
Was there like a situation you encountered or like a particular event in that marketing agency that you is defining for you that made you start to think that?
A good question. Yes. I remember specifically we were expanding, opened a new office in a new state. And the offices that the agency had were all really close together geographically. So we could drive to one another. We kind of had this culture that was developed through that. And this other kind of out-of-state office couldn't see any of that. So I was asked to go and try to help develop that. Just share who we are.
Yeah.
And we didn't even use the word culture. Yeah. It's a vibe.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We don't have to use this textbook definition. It was just Matt, go talk about who we are with them. And when we onboard people, we didn't even use the word onboarding. I mean, those things are things those words are things that we've developed to try to describe what we do. But really, it's bringing in people and helping them understand who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah.
And that comes across in the way we relate to our clients. So in that moment, when I went out to that office and said, okay, this is who we are.
Yeah.
I started realizing, there's a lot to this.
Yeah.
You can't just walk in and talk about it. You have to really you have to understand, you have
live
to be
and breathe
student
it, right?
of it. Yeah.
Student of it. I like that.
Yeah.
So what was the first thing that you did?
So this was back when First Break All the Rules and Now Discover Your Strengths were the two kind of books that had come out about culture. And so we actually took the 12 questions as a company, and I used that. So I guess you might say I used some data to try to convey it. Very basic data. What do the other employees at this company say we are? And it, I think, helped paint a picture.
Yeah.
Do I have a best friend at work? Do you remember?
Yeah.
That was one of the questions. And I know that that question has gone up and down in terms of popularity over the years. But remember, how many people said they did at our company. And that was really interesting to these new employees who were like, I never really knew that I would have friends
right.
at work.
It gets to the heart of connection, right? We talk about engagement, but like connecting to those that you work with is a big part of why people stay and why people do what they do, right? Yeah. Amongst all the factors that could play a role in, why they're, why they're where they're at. Yeah. So, okay. So you move on to HR, you go to business school and you still remain interested in doing this thing
and can
called
we talk
HR.
about, that's when we met.
Yeah, right.
You were recruiting. Yeah. I came in to do our company's first employee engagement survey.
Oh, that's right. Like as an intern.
Yes. And I think what still is significant to me is that was completely an HR sponsored thing. Mm-hmm. It was HR funded, and it was ultimately HR owned completely through the process.
Yeah.
And that's how any thing starts, is you have to have a department that's willing to put up the money and the resources.
Did we have an executive sponsor? I can't remember if there was an executive
I think our executive sponsor was the head of HR. Mm-hmm. And so, and I don't think we're not going to like wah about that. Like that's the way those things started. And that was years and years ago. Yeah. I mean, we look great, but, but I think what struck me was there was very little interest in it until all of a sudden we had a ton of data for people about their teams.
Yeah.
That was so that's when I started seeing like, oh, we actually, if we do this right, we could get people interested.
Yeah.
And even start owning what this kind of whole idea is like assessing the vibe.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We assessed the vibe there. And I do think that at least the next survey had more sponsorship outside of HR.
How did we get people to take the survey? Like, that's a question, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, data is amazing, and it takes people to get the data. So like, how do you, and maybe it's not even in the ad example, but like in any example of where you've been since then, like, how do you incentivize people without dangling a carrot saying like, answer and we'll give you this, right? Yeah. Or maybe you would do, like, what does that look like? Or why do people give you data?
Yeah, in all honesty, I think I took my marketing chops and said, if we market this well, people will take it. And sometimes when something's new, you just have to, it's in the marketing, right? Yeah. So I remember like we delivered something that was like a memento of the survey to each employee. And I don't know that necessarily works, but it starts selling itself once employees and leaders start seeing that there's actually a story that this data tells. And especially for employees, if they see that changes are being made based on that data, that I think then you have to do less marketing. But the minute a company stops listening to the data they're getting, and employees feel like they're responding to this survey and nothing's happening, you see, and that's not just surveys. That's, you stop giving me a regular feedback session or reviews if you do reviews. Like once you stop communicating out to an employee, they stop communicating back with you.
Yeah.
And that seems to be pretty fundamental.
So let's talk about that, because that's a leader thing, right? So it is, HR is a group of people, but this is a bigger topic of leaders and like leaders listening and leaders understanding and leaders showing that they care and they have concern. So can you talk to me about like how your role in helping people and helping leaders listen?
So I think one of the things is to find a leader who is a good listener and have them tell their story. So I've had a number of jobs where I walked in and said, okay, so how do I start explaining what my philosophy is? Because I don't want it to just be some one size fits all HR.
Yeah. So you're going to be authentic.
Yeah, I'd like to be, right? And so I immediately start asking questions like, who's known to be a good leader at this company or in this division? When I worked for a larger enterprise, it was like, in this division, who do you say is an exemplary leader?
Yeah.
And it's not someone who's necessarily at the top of their game. They just lead well. And sometimes I get middle managers who are named as people. So when I interviewed for the job I'm in right now, I asked to speak with 2 people who are known to be good leaders that have nothing to do with this hiring process.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in front of one of them in particular. He'd worked himself up from just an entry-level position to then managing a division of like 50 employees.
Yeah.
And so I got to talk to him a little bit about what is leadership to you in my interview.
Yeah.
And what do you think HR's role should be in purveying that leadership? And his answers told me a lot, of course, about his character, but also about if this is a person who grew from an individual contributor entry level into a leader at this company, they taught him something, or the culture around him taught him something about that. So I think talking, if you're new in your role, talking to those who are seen by others as examples gets you not only good people to put on a pedestal, but also really good information about the vibe.
So what was it that showed he was a good leader and gave you the confidence that he, in fact, articulated a culture that you wanted to be a part of?
So I could ask him very specific questions about his people, and he would know the answers. Like I asked, how many of your people have small children? And he knew.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, we've got a handful that are new moms.
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean? Well, it means that he's considering that as he's building his team or assigning work or whatever. So I think knowing some of the
personal side of people.
Yeah, which we have to. We're no longer in this place of like you leave home at home and work at work.
Like with your briefcase, walking out the door and you're like suit and tie.
Yeah. So he could speak specifically to his people, but he also could speak more strategically so tell me what's different today from 3 years ago about the customer service organization that you lead. And he could actually express themes. He was not a strategy guru. He wasn't like, he couldn't put together like a 9-box about his org.
Yeah.
But he knew what was different today from 3 years prior. And he was able to articulate what he thinks happened to create that change. And so the other person that I met was an individual contributor who she was in our marketing organization.
Which I love talking about individual contributors who possess leadership skills because not everybody wants to lead a team.
Yeah. And I love that they identified when I said I wanted to talk to 2 people who were known as leaders, I got a leader of people and I got an individual contributor.
Yeah.
So again, that was data for me about the way this company thinks about its people. So she expressed just how she was surprised to know that she was seen as a leader. And that was a note, right?
Yeah.
Like we should be telling people, like this is what your trajectory is.
Yeah.
Allowing them to, I think we need to help identify. I have a friend who is also in the HR space, and he often says, are we helping people see their superpowers?
100%.
Right. And it's not an HR job.
No.
It is I'm working with you on a day-to-day basis. I see a superpower that you may not know you have. Can I just show it to you? So she didn't know about that. So I think that's something that I've tried to bring to my role is encouraging leaders to do that a little bit more. Yeah. But her leadership skills were very clear in that a lot of people wanted to follow her. There are a number of people that wanted to do a job like hers, and we didn't even have enough jobs like that because so many people were like, they're watching her and going, she's having fun at work, or she's doing a great job. I think I could do that. So the inspiration that came with that leadership, I think, spoke volumes to who she was.
Yeah, like her influence, her circle of influence expands quite far.
Yeah.
How interesting. So how did the company identify her as a leader, or what did they have in place to identify her as a leader, but keep her in an individual contributor role? And then also, did she want to be a leader of people, or did the company have the infrastructure to set up so that she could show this superpower forever without going up the chain?
So just because we're having a transparent conversation, she left because she didn't see where she could go and either not be a leader or like, so this is where you like, you're like, oh, we could lose. And I do think that it was a failure of the system to a certain extent, but her direct supervisor. There's so much. I don't think we talk enough about how much it means, that next level of people, and her next level did not enable her. I'm not blaming.
Yeah.
It's just that's what
the power of the power of the people in leadership roles, right? And what the impact they have. Yeah.
So and to answer your primary question there, I think, and this is probably true for a lot of companies, it's a gut check. Like, that person's good, that person's good, but we don't always know why. And that's where the data, I think, can come in, be a little bit more handy. Like, do we know why we would say that person's a good leader? Have we vetted it? And that's not to say they're wrong.
Right.
But if we can say why, then it allows us to know how to develop those same qualities in others.
Yeah. Well, and there's this idea of like continuous learning too, right? So like once you identify why or what makes a good leader within your organization, how do you continuously develop them? And I don't mean sending them to the leadership training program, but like creating the environment so that they feel supported and they feel that they can continue to learn in that individual contributor role.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one of the things that I try to bring to each of my roles is more of I'm here to give that coaching. There are so many people in the driver's seat of what you just said.
Tell me about that.
So let's talk about what's going on right now in the world, which is nobody's coming to an office. We're talking mostly US, right? Like, we're sitting here in the recording room of our 600 person office building with how many people?
It is desolate. It feels like a company that's closing.
Yeah, right.
And
we are thriving. People are working from home. They are doing really well. They're highly productive. We had 82% responses on a recent survey.
Yeah.
Like, people are engaged to a certain extent. They also have a lot to say.
Yeah.
And things are changing. But I think, going back to where we were is, okay, so we're in this space where we don't have a lot of touch points with employees.
Yeah.
So an employee's experience with their company is almost entirely manager and team. And that has never been the case before.
Right.
Like, in the history of work.
Yeah.
It's usually you're with everybody.
People are talking to you.
The whole idea.
Good or bad, they're interacting with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember when there was this, like, the term the water cooler conversation? We started talking about that because we knew as business leaders how much happens outside your team and your manager.
Right.
Well, now we're limited to team and manager. And some companies are trying to do a nice job with, like, let's create spaces, virtual spaces for people to enjoy, like, something, a conversation not work related. Let's do a
coffee chat, whatever. Yeah.
And but truly the experience that someone has with their company is, when I think about, all I'm doing is looking at a screen, and the faces of the screen are either my boss or my team, project team or functional team, or maybe like broader team. But like, we're talking a very small. So they used to see 600 people in this building, or
and now they see 16 on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis.
Yeah. And so I think that, if there are any managers listening to this, anyone who's a manager of people, do you realize how important you are and how much more important you became since March of 2020? It put managers in a position of importance that I don't think many of us were ready for.
It's probably the same concept of like a good salesperson and then they become a sales manager, right? Yeah. It's like that same gap is there because just because they were good at sales doesn't mean they'd be good at managing people. And now we have managers or leaders that may have been good because they could see you, they could,
right. Yeah.
And now they don't see you. They didn't know how to manage in the first place. They kind of faked it till they made it,
right? Right.
Whatever. And then, I don't know.
I get this question a lot. What are you doing to, Matt, what are you doing? You're the head of HR.
Yeah.
What are you doing to build our culture in this new environment? And listen, I believe that HR has a place and a position in defining and helping to enable culture, but we can't own it. And I love that there was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about who owns culture. And a quote that I picked up is that culture can be defined as the ways people in an organization behave and the attitudes and beliefs that inform that behavior. It's everybody. Everybody creates culture. And the purveyors of that culture are the ones that have influence in the lives of employees. Who has the most influence in my life? My manager.
Yeah.
The person who's going to decide whether or not I get to stay, how much I earn, whether or not I get a promotion, like that. They are the purveyors of those behaviors, and their behaviors, their work could be enabling or it could be really disabling. And again, like, not to overemphasize the point, but to just express what a great opportunity for those who manage people, but also what an opportunity to actually negatively influence culture. So I think cultures are going to take a totally different shape. So I think we used to say cultures are defined by, core values on a wall, a mission statement. And I think there could be a core of that, some foundational principles. This is the way we operate. This is the way we behave. But it only comes to life when the manager and the team bring it to life.
Can live it out in like every moment of every day.
Yeah. So when we talk about work vibes, Kristi, I think I love what we get to talk about here, and what your other guests are talking about is the vibe is now transmitted in different ways than ever
Connection, before. Inspirational leadership, autonomy, flexibility, rewards and recognition. And even rewards and recognition look different, right? Because you can't just walk by somebody's desk, maybe in some environments, right? Because there are still environments that people have to be in person, but it's just the expectation looks different. It
does. And even in those places, I've talked to my peers who have a lot of in-person work to do, and there are those. They still are deferring to managers more than ever before. So what created that? Things like, well, the manager was put in this awkward position of, if there was a COVID outbreak, that team had to deal with it, or that like the manager was put in these positions of responsibility that they never had before. And so their influence again, it was like predicated on this idea that they're making the calls, they're making the judgment calls on these things.
And how they do that has a huge impact and influence. Yeah. And I don't know that anybody has stopped for a minute to think through that.
Or to even see where they sit within it.
Yeah.
Like, so there's, diagnosing what the culture looks like.
Right.
Also, oh, wow. I don't think I realized how many eyeballs were looking at me.
For sure.
To actually create the experience they're having here.
And giving leaders an opportunity to opt out and say, this is not for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want that. But going back to your story, like, if they opt out, is it career limiting? Is there a path for them still? And I think organizations have to recreate what that continuous learning and development and career trajectory looks like for those people who simply are like, I love it here and I hate what I'm doing.
Right. And leadership has there are ways for you to be a leader and not be a manager of people, like we were talking about. I don't know that every company's ready to have those discussions. And I think you start with, does every manager understand their importance? Keeping it simple. The tone that you take is the tone that will be received. And the way people talk about our company has a lot to do with the way they experience you as their manager. That's just all.
Yeah.
And let's just start there.
Yeah.
And not to put so much pressure on, and so you now need to be just like our CEO,
right?
Because we want you to convey the same exact vibe as our CEO. No. We want it to be authentic to you, but do you realize that the things that you do influence the way people think? There was this was years ago when there was this popular survey that that people don't leave companies, they leave managers.
Yeah. I think there was an HBR article on that.
There might have been. And I think everyone was quoting that for a long time.
Yeah.
And then maybe it was like, no, I think people care more about compensation than, but I think it's on the rise. I would say if we resurveyed, once again, they've made the decision based on the experience they're having with their direct supervisor. Yeah.
So, okay, you go into a company as an HR leader, and what's the one thing, or where do you start, right? Because a lot of people listening are like, there's so much information, I don't even know where to start. What do I do? If you could keep like it down to one thing, what would you say?
So it's more one question.
Okay.
I want to go broad with my question, but I want to go into every facet of the organization with this question, which is, why do you work here? Just tell me why you work here.
Yeah.
And if I get a lot of because I need a paycheck, that's a very different experience than if I get a lot of because I believe in the mission of the company. I mean, I'm asking a survey question, but I'm asking it in real time from real people and asking for also a little bit of qualitative data with that, right? I've done that in 4 different jobs now. Why do you work here? And it has varied. Like there have been companies I've worked for it's the paycheck, either because the company is known to pay really well, or because they just kind of employ people who aren't really passionate about what they do. All the way to where I am now, they really say it's because of the mission of the company. I believe in what we're doing here, and we're not a nonprofit. There are companies that make a profit and I think more and more we're seeing demographics are shifting where that really is important to people.
Yes.
But the answer to the question, why you work here, tells you so much. Like I'm never surprised. After I've done a couple of weeks of that. And I think it's important for your audience to know that's not an HR question.
Right.
That isn't anybody question. Take a new job, go around, ask people why they work here. Or better yet, ask a question before you take the job.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time out. I think this is some great information and just a great place for people to start if they're just completely lost in so much data. Have you ever asked a company to meet with 2 leaders inside the company that were not directly related to the role you were interviewing for? This is a fantastic way to find out organically about the vibe of an organization. This helps you see the character of the leaders and ask questions like, why do you work here? To better understand the things that matter, but may not show up in a traditional interview process. I wonder how many organizations would entertain something like this, something that Matt does. I guess if they don't, that is an indication in itself about the company's vibe. Keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.